God's Word brings people to faith, it enables people to grow in faith, and it encourages people in turn to share their faith. The grass withers, the flower falls, but the word of the Lord will stand forever. Christianity is about the wonder of what Christ has done. He loved you before the dawn of time. The answer to our broken world is found only one place, at the cross of Jesus Christ. So I have said to you that I think I can probably do better through in the children's wing with Daniel 8 than I can do with some of us in here, because we will not allow the text to do what the text is there to do, to cause us, first of all, to see, to hear, to get underneath the weight of it. Some of you, and I mentioned this in passing, but some of you have never really been able to deal with the apocalyptic passages because you never got the picture. Because you fiddled around with inconsequential, inexplicable details, thereby missing it entirely. Well, I don't know how far we'll get this morning, but we'll get as far as we can, and we'll notice, first of all, that there was a ram, and it had two horns. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal, and it had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Well, if you've been tracking, you say to yourself, I think we've had an inkling of this before. We had that creature where one side was leaning on the one side was higher than the other. That's exactly right. And one horn, the one that comes out latter, is seen higher than the other. The kingdom of Medo-Persia, where eventually Persia supersedes the Medo part of it and triumphs in this immense way, so that Persia rules. You say, well, where'd you get that from? Well, verse 20. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media-Persia. So you don't have to be a genius. You just have to read your Bible. All right? Now, the ram represents this empire. The higher part of the horn representing the dominance of Persia. And I saw the ram charging westward, northward, and southward. You read of the story of history, and you find that these are the movements of the Persians as they conquered in their day. They were apparently invincible. No beast could stand before him. There was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased, and he became very great. All right? So, verse 4 covers a tremendous chunk of time and a significant amount of geography. But the details of it are not provided for us there because we don't need them. This is where the empire went. This is how the empire conceived of itself. This is the way in which it dominated the then known world. Incidentally, you remember back in chapter 5 when Belshazzar is really distressed because of the hand that is writing on the wall. In fact, if you turn back a couple of pages, you can remind yourself of it there. And his mother says, why don't you get Daniel in here, because Daniel's good at stuff like this and he can help you out. And so Daniel was brought in before the king, and the king explains to him what's going on, how the hand was writing on the wall. And in verse 26 of chapter 5, Daniel says, this is the interpretation of the matter. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided, and it is given away to the Medes and to the Persians. Well, in actual fact, you see, that is exactly what happened. And Daniel had been made privy to that, and so he was able to address him in such a direct way. He had seen the collapse of the Babylonian Empire. It was a done deal. And God had pulled back for Daniel a little part of the curtain to give him a glimpse of the purposes of God. So, Verse 4 ends with a picture of invincibility, of a sort of unfettered greatness. But verse 5 begins, as I was thinking about this, as I was giving it some thought, there appeared in my vision a male goat, actually literally a hairy goat, from the west, came across the face of the whole earth, and it was as if it never even touched the ground in its movement. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. Now, what is this? Well, verse 21 will help you. And the goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between his eyes is the first king. In other words, is a reference to Alexander the Great. History records it. Incidentally, prophecy in the Bible is not always future for us when we read the Bible. This prophecy was future for Daniel, but it's history for us, right? But that's not a surprise, because Isaiah 53 was future for Isaiah, but it is history for us who, in the person of the Lord Jesus, have been introduced to the one who is the suffering servant. In the same way that the prophecy of Isaiah concerning a virgin who will conceive and bring forth a son is future for Isaiah, it is history for us. And in this, we find that Daniel has been given an insight into what awaits those who are going to come after him. We then are able to read it with the ability of hindsight and put together some of the pieces that were inexplicable to those who were in the middle of it. It is, incidentally, a testimony to the truthfulness of the Bible. Can God, 5 centuries out, make these kind of predictions and be true? Did God actually give to Daniel a revelation that Daniel could not actually fully get his head around that was going to prove the reality that it did? The answer is yes. In fact, this is one of the evidences of the fact that the Bible is true, that which is prophesied comes to fruition. But those who deny the Bible and deny God come to chapter 8 and say, this can't happen. God can't do this. Therefore, what we have in chapter 8 is material that was written after the events that are described. Otherwise, nobody could ever describe them. You see the difference between bowing down underneath the authority of God's word as provided and setting ourselves up as an authority over God's word to determine what can and cannot be, what happened and what didn't happen. And this male goat with the conspicuous horn came to the ram with the 2 horns, which he had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. This is where I'm saying to you that you've got to get underneath this. I don't think you can read this and go, oh, that's very interesting. You kind of read it and you go, oh, I'm glad I wasn't there for that. The way in which they just go at each other. I mean, you recoil from it. You can hear the noise almost, can't you, of these horns going at one another, hitting one another. You're supposed to. You're supposed to. I mean, why should Daniel be the only one who's appalled and freaked out and have to go to his bed? You're supposed to sit here and go, oh, that's very interesting. No, you're supposed to go, whoa, that's amazing. That says Baldwin, Joyce Baldwin. She says, the sight and the sound of the horns breaking is typifying the brittle and ultimately fragile nature of political might. Yeah, I wish I could have written that sentence just for once in my life. One good sentence. The sight and the sounds of the horns breaking typifies the brittle, ultimately fragile nature of political might. The kingdoms of the world clashing against one another, one superseding the other, one to rise up invincible, the power of the great king or whoever it is, and then eventually history comes around and he's gone. I was pondering this week when I was thinking about this, the rise and fall of empires, the Third Reich. What a disaster, what an amazing period in history. The Nuremberg trials. All of those proud, arrogant rascals finally on trial for the heinous things that they did. Goebbels and all of them sentenced to death, cremated, executed, cremated. Their cremated remains put together in one large tub, placed on the back of a truck, and driven out into the darkness of the countryside in the night and tipped into a flowing stream. Months before, they rule the world. Now, their ashes flow for people to walk on. You see, only God's kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. Only God's majesty is untrammeled majesty. Man as man continues to believe, we will fix it, we will get it right, and so on. But no, look how the mighty are fallen. The ram, who at the end of chapter 4 was apparently invincible, the Persian Empire, nobody could rescue from the power of the Persian Empire. The king did exactly as he pleased in verse 4. But now we find that this same ram had no power to stand before the goat. The goat cast him to the ground. The goat trampled on him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. And the goat became exceedingly great. Oh, you see, Alexander's victories are recorded well in history. Some of us had to try and study it in history. And the story here of Alexander's movements, you see, it was almost as if his feet never touched the ground. When you read the conquests of Alexander, you realize that to that point in history, nobody had been as amazingly and dramatically and quickly victorious as Alexander had been. Within a decade, when he was still in his 20s, he ruled the world. By the time he was 26, he had won these amazing battles in his 20s. And you can find them recorded. One of them, at the Granicus River in 334 BC, Alexander takes 35,000 of his troops, and he goes against the Persian Empire, 100,000 footmen and 10,000 horsemen. And Alexander's forces killed 20,000 of the opposition to the loss of only 100 Greek soldiers. That was then in turn followed by 2 amazing victories that established his territory and said Alexander is just absolutely on top of the world, looking down on creation. He was a hero at 29. He was dead at 33. And the story of his death is a reminder of the fact that he ends in utter humiliation. You see, we're slow to pay attention to this, aren't we? As for man, his days are like grass, and the glory of man is like the flower of the field. The grass withers and the flower falls, the wind blows over his place and he remembers it no more. Because you see, it is the Ancient of Days, God himself in chapter 7, who, says Isaiah, brings princes to nothing and makes the rulers of the earth as emptiness. Scarcely are they planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, when he blows on them and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. So Alexander, at the height of his confident, self-proclaimed magnificence, is reduced to a state of utter humiliation, and portents and tales of intrigue and poison surround his death. Apparently they found him dead in the palace of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. And he, who is the great man of the day, is then replaced. The great goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. It's a story of history. It's the story of the Bible, actually. It's the story of the fact that God doesn't give his glory to anybody else. It doesn't matter if you're a politician or a pastor. He doesn't share it. Why would he share it? He's God. Uzziah, the great king, 17 years old, becomes the king. Everybody says, boy, this guy's really got it. He has it militarily. He's got it in terms of architecture. He's got it in terms of the development of social networks within his nation. There's nobody like Uzziah. And his empire grew. And he was very, very successful. But you know how he died? He was leprous. He died in humiliation. He didn't die in his palace. He died, as it were, in a gatehouse at the bottom of the field. And the chronicler tells us why. He says of Uzziah, he was gloriously helped until he became strong. But when he grew strong, he became proud to his own destruction. You see, the seeds of his destruction were in his usefulness. A usefulness that was given him by God. The seeds of Alexander's demise were grounded in the fact that he was so phenomenally great. But he believed that his magnificence was all of his own. And the great horn, the great goat, when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead there came up 4 conspicuous horns. Now we'll have to come back to this. Let me finish in this way. Read history, and you know that when Alexander the Great died, there were 4 generals that took over under him, managing all of the stuff that he had been lord over. Cassander, who ruled over Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus, over Thrace and Asia Minor. Seleucus, over Syria and Mesopotamia. And Ptolemy, remember the Ptolemies, over Egypt. And out of the 4, out of one of them, verse 9, and history records this as well, came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great. Some of you are going, oh good, we're back on familiar territory. We remember the little horn from chapter 7. Well, I got bad news for you. This is a different little horn. In chapter 7, the little horn represents the Antichrist. In chapter 8, the little horn represents Antiochus Epiphanes, who embodies all the characteristics of man's rebellion against God. And once again, this little horn grows exceedingly great and goes to amazing extent in opposition to God and his people. And to that we will have to come back. So how can we stop? Well, you just stop. But I mean, how can I end this just now, as it were, prematurely? Let me tell you what I wrote down for myself. I reminded myself that this vision is given to Daniel to forewarn Israel about a period of severe persecution, which is going to come in the future, and to assure them that their sovereign God will limit the days of persecution and destroy the persecutor. That's what is conveyed in this vision. That's why Daniel writes it down, so that when all of this unfolds, the people will be enabled to say, but wait a minute, this is exactly what God said would happen. Don't you think that is pretty similar to the way in which Jesus prepared his disciples as well? I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. They will put you out of the synagogues. The time is coming when whoever kills you will think he's offering a service to God. And they will do these things because they haven't known the Father or me. But I have said these things to you, that when their hour comes, you may remember that I have told them to you. So God is doing the exact same thing now, all of these periods of time before the coming of the Lord Jesus. And the function of chapter 8, the function of the whole section, is not for our calendar, but for our comfort. We'll come back tonight to the 2,300 days, which for some of you is like a red rag to a bull. You just can't wait to get to the 2,300 days. And what are we going to do with them? Well, we'll see, but let me tell you this. Number one, God knows what's up. That's what I wrote in my notes. God knows what's up. Number two, God is at work behind the scenes. Therefore, stay steady, be prepared, and to quote Yogi Berra, it's not over till it's over. How absurd is it? Now, you know, I sometimes tell you that I think that I'm flying the plane, Airbus 380 or whatever else, that I'm in row 24C, and you know, I'm flying the plane. No, you're not flying the plane. You've got nothing to do with the plane. Just sit there and let the pilot fly the plane. It's an absurd idea, isn't it? But aren't there some of us who think that we're flying the plane of our lives, that we're in charge of our own destiny? You know, I was thinking this morning, you know, my kids gave me a shoehorn for my Christmas a few years ago. You know you're getting old when you get stuff like that. But I was thankful for it in the early hours of this morning because it's quite long. And so I don't have to go all the way down and come all the way back, you know. So I can do just like this. It's a wonderful thing. Everyone should have one. Every breath you breathe is a gift from God. You really think you're going to run your own universe? You can't run you can't run the tap without God's help. I can't get synovial fluid enough to make my knees go up and down without God's enabling. My eyes would be stuck shut in the night were it not for the fact that He wakened me up. There is no breath for my body apart from His provision. So, lest we get all churned up 5 centuries away, let's acknowledge this, that the arrogance of Persia and the arrogance of Greece and the proud defiance of man as man is endemic to us by nature. Believing ourselves to be able to fix it, believing ourselves to be in control, and refusing to bow and say, "Oh, Father, you are sovereign in all the world you've made. Be sovereign in my world, sovereign in my heart, sovereign in my marriage, sovereign in my business endeavors. Lord, let me bow before your greatness." I wrote in my notes these things, and I'll tell you, and I'm stopping. The function of this highly symbolic chapter is not for my calendar, it's for my comfort. That's number one. It's not for my calendar, it's for my comfort. So if I go calendar, I miss why it's there. Secondly, God knows what's up. I was at a black church in Jacksonville this week, and many of the brothers said to me, "Hey man, what's up? What's up?" And I said, you know, God knows what's up. Also, God is at work behind the scenes. Therefore, stay steady, be prepared, and we ought to quote Yogi Berra at least once, and it's not over until it's over. And it's not over. And the reason it's in here is so that we might understand that the God who looked after His rebellious children 5 centuries BC is the same faithful, sovereign God that will look after His rebellious children 21 AD. Take heart. Father, thank you that you make these truths available to us in all kinds of different ways in the drama that is contained here in these visions. And we think of Daniel so long ago, so far away, getting up in the morning and processing all of this and somehow or another recording it for the benefit of those who would come behind him, and you preserving it in the Holy Scriptures in order that today we might study it, in order that we might stand far enough back from it to learn from these great pictures that you are the sovereign God, that your glory you don't share, and that at the end of the day, yours is a kingdom that will never come to an end, and a dominion that will never fail. Help us then to translate that from the macro to the micro as we think about our lives and our hopes and our fears, the things that make us anxious, the things that destabilize us. May we bow down before your sovereign power. For we pray in Christ's name. Amen.